When it comes to the games that linger in my mind, I think of my past experiences a lot. Gaming is one of those hobbies nowadays where, with the power of modern hardware, you can basically play and experience anything. As kids, we tended to have this unacknowledged but conscious feeling that as we played, the worlds we walked through and the skyboxes that spanned all the way into the horizon felt infinite. Infinite, like there was more to them than really meets the eye. And it was our imaginations that drove us to wander beyond, sometimes very literally. I can very much vividly recall learning about such cases like GoldenEye, that feeling of infinity in a world only limited by the imaginations of its players, only amplified by the discovery of such things like the hidden offshoot island that goes unused in the dam level. Would it have ever been discovered if people chose not to wonder what lies beyond, delve into the great unknown past the boundaries of the game they care about? I tend to think about that a lot, and even now, we have yet to look deeper into the games of the past. Not everyone can data mine, let alone wade through a digital sea of code to see what sunken treasures lie within the ones and zeros of these artificial worlds. We're still discovering things now as people get more knowledgeable. At the same time, I think about how imagination and gaming goes hand in hand. It's the imagination of creatives within the industry that create these experiences in the first place. Every moment we smile, we laugh, we cry, or even get stressed out over not being able to get past a certain threshold in a video game, it all ties back to that imagination. To create something that elicits those emotions, like any good piece of art. Something that creates those feelings. As an adult, despite the fact that I don't really play games as much as I used to as a kid, what with my many responsibilities that tie into my everyday survival, my heart and soul still resonate with those feelings I've accumulated thanks to what I've played in my kid and teen years. A game like Deltarune really resonates with me. Created by Toby Fox and his development team, the man responsible for the cultural juggernaut known as Undertale has proceeded in the last few years to grace the gaming landscape in the indie scene with another game entirely, a game that he's had in mind since all the way back in 2012, according to him. From its surprise reveal all the way back on Halloween of 2018 to its continued development as of this video, Deltarune has made waves across the internet, touching all corners of the known net and the hearts of many. As an incomplete game, however, with its chapters on a semi-scheduled basis, and with the occasional development update keeping the flickering flame of interest alive, Deltarune has gained what I see to be a peculiar state of existence to me and others. As we have, so far, 2 chapters, interest continues to be poured into the game. Fan art, animations, the fandom's own interpretations of the vague clues about future chapters, fanfiction, so on. Like any modern game, it's attained its own following, patiently awaiting continuation as time passes by and the seasons change. I've been amongst them, that fandom. I don't really like to involve myself within fandoms all that much nowadays due to my, again, ever-growing lack of time, but I've been amongst the following of this game since the very start. Despite the incomplete nature of Deltarune in its current state and my life's priorities, my attention and time pulled like taffy in a tumbling plethora of different directions, I've never stopped having interest in Deltarune. A lot of people haven't forgot or stopped having interest, despite the half a decade that's passed by in what feels like a flash, probably in part thanks to the recent pandemic that lingers in our public memory. I've always been curious as to why, but as time has passed, lingering on the first chapter in the past 5 years has led me to probably digest, understand what I felt, but never been able to fully ascertain or describe. A feeling in my being that makes me and so many others, millions, magnetized to this game, drawn to it like a moth to flame. Deltarune to me is one of the best representations of pure imagination and creativity within a video game, and what makes it beautiful. It serves to be one of the most fascinating cases of pure imagination and using it beautifully in a variety of different ways to create something that's been pulling others back to it for half a decade now. I want to go over my personal experience with this game, look at why the game means so much to me and millions more, and generally give perspective on what keeps people coming back. What keeps people coming back to this whimsical, almost nostalgic adventure. I'll be looking over the first chapter of the game. Let's start, shall we? Speaking my thoughts on this game is such a genuinely peculiar feeling. Have you ever had something that you really dearly love but you don't outwardly speak of it? You know, you just merely type out to your friends, you acknowledge it in text, but when you have the chance to speak on it, it feels really weird. I get that feeling with Deltarune, to be honest. Since it's revealed to the world, the game itself and its community feel quite hyper online, something that I find only exacerbated in recent years. While I find this strange to speak on, I am very happy I have this chance to begin with. This game means a hell of a lot to me. For a while I've wanted to cover it in some way, but I never really found the right way to express my feelings on it. Now I'm glad I'm able to speak on it though. So, from the get-go, how did all of this come to be? How did Deltarune come to be? Let's turn back the clock and let's set the stage for this whole thing, shall we? The year is 2018. Fairly quiet year. We're all preoccupied with Tide Pods, Knuckles and touching pasta, though we don't notice that Halloween is dawning on us. Befitting of the season, it's crept around the corner, looming over us. Merely another moment passing by in an active yet fairly relaxed year. Out of the cryptic crawls, and here it is on our doorstep once more. But something strange begins to occur. Something strange on Twitter. Now, the site is not averse to, let's just say, interesting happenings. A lot of interesting posts have come from the place, but for people in the Undertale fandom, or those with a passing interest in the ever-elusive Toby Fox, their attention is pulled towards a tweet on the official Undertale Twitter account on the 30th of October, eve of Halloween. The Undertale Twitter account is a simple place. Fairly simple place for cataloguing new happenings with the beloved indie title. It's been posting, fairly recently at this point, but things seem to change. On the eve of Halloween, a tweet was posted to the account, simply reading, "Welcome," in all caps. Seems a bit innocuous, doesn't it? Well, this is after a slew of fairly regular posts, either about the game or some happenings related to Toby himself. Something here is different though, and people can feel it. The replies are abuzz with a certain level of unease, like there's something approaching. Very soon, very quick. There's a crackling in the air, a buzz of expectation. But expecting what? We don't know. In the span of a single day, the Undertale Twitter account had mutated from a simple promotional tool to ominously posting about something. Nobody knew what exactly. Speculation was abuzz, abundant. The spotlight shone by commenters and characters from Undertale in suspicion of their connection to whatever shenanigans had been occurring for the past day. With some speculation it had to do with an update to Undertale on the Switch a few months ago. No one was sure. I actually remember browsing the net at the time. My siblings alerted me to strange stuff, quote unquote, happening on the Undertale Twitter account. I was surprised for two reasons. One, that my siblings even had their eye on the damn thing, since they have no interest in Undertale, or Toby Fox for that matter. And two, that such strange events were happening in the first place. For the next day and a half, the account would continue to ominously post, with sentiments beginning to shift from confusion and uneasiness over what was going on to speculation arising over just what this was leading up to. Getting told to wait 24 hours for something on this Twitter account, everyone, including myself, waited patiently. The following is every ominous message leading up to what would be revealed, all compiled together for your convenience. Welcome. Have you been looking for me? How wonderful. I have been looking for you as well. I have something I want to show you. Something I think you will find very, very interesting. But it is not complete yet. No, it is far from complete. Thus, I have a small favour to ask of you. Return here in 24 hours. At that time, I will ask you a few questions. Then, using your responses, we will approach its realization. Thank you very much for your time. I'll be in contact again soon. Thank you for waiting so long. After all, you and I, we have both been waiting such a very long time. So to be here, finally, on the verge of connection is quite exciting. I look forward to creating a new future with you. Now, show yourself, Deltarune! Everything here had been leading up to something, but what, we weren't sure. I recall the atmosphere of the fandom and Twitter. Everyone who had been seeing this at the time, all of it was just bristling with this sense of anticipation I haven't seen anywhere else ever since, and an ominous sense of surprise. After an entire 24 hours of waiting, we were given a link, deltarune.com. While the site is in a very different state nowadays, we, at the time, were greeted with this. Welcome. Please read these final warnings, then take it in your hands. A warning for flashing imagery, how to override security protocols, and refraining from discussing the program, to accept everything that happens from now on. Strange. Yeah, just a bit strange. So little details, ominous text, and ask for silence, mentions of the program. Any semblance of confusion over what this was had begun to wane. Whatever was going on, this was big and strange. Was this just a small spook? A small program to creep people out? Creep out the biggest of Undertale fans? Or drive more people to the former game? It was hard to determine. And as we were asked for silence, we obeyed. For a moment, an entire fandom went completely silent, dead in their tracks, and thousands of executables were launched. Even as we moved past the barrier of the webpage and the air of mystique, everything would only get more ominous from here. A license agreement like that of a computer program, asking us to accept everything as we launched the file downloaded from the site, leading to darkness inside. On some computers, and I really remember this vividly, Windows flagged the file accidentally as suspicious, which only further added to more alarm bells in the minds of the most protective and wary of PC players. Yet we all came to the same screen, eventually. In the darkness, text displays across the screen. It's October 31st, 2018. An entire fandom has gone silent, demanded into silence by whoever was communicating through the Twitter account. And now here. Are you there? It asks. Are we connected? Suddenly, a burst of red emits from the centre of the screen. For those unfamiliar with Undertale, it raises questions such as what the hell this is, and why it's presented to us. For Undertale fans, or anyone with baseline knowledge of the game, that's a soul. The very culmination of the player, a mechanic of Undertale that those familiar with the game will be very, very, very wary of seeing here of all places. Excellent. Truly excellent. Now, we may begin. The soul disappears, and we're taken to a dark, foggy character selection screen, demanded to make a character of our own. All the while strange noises pulse through the audio like there's something hiding in the midst of it all. What in the absolute hell had we stumbled into? I remember my very first moments on this screen. It feels weird to think about in retrospect, but yeah, I remember at the time, I was confused. Was there more to this? Was this just an elaborate prank? The noises in the background, they're the same used in Undertale, which then stem from Gygus, from Earthbound, or Mother 2 if you want to be pedantic. Why were we being asked to create a character? Why these oddly specific questions? In unease, an entire fandom answered, be it honestly or dishonestly, asked if we loved what we created, giving it aspects to create its personality. We were asked if we acknowledged the possibility of pain or seizure, questions as ominous as this, like the leading text on social media from an entity or person we don't know, and despite all of that, our creation is discarded. What? No one can choose who they are in this world? Everything fades to white, and here we are. This isn't just a survey program. Oh, no. This is a game, a full-on game. An Undertale sequel? Or a prequel? Toriel from Undertale is here? What in the hell is going on? Too many thoughts, too little time, as we're woken up by the goat mom in question. Our name being Kris. A human living in Hometown, a town full of monsters. We wake up, get ready for school, and depart. A joyous fanfare blooms as a small montage of the town is shown, familiar characters and new ones waving as Toriel drives Kris to the local school. I adore this intro. For a world that seems so different, yet familiar with those mentions of characters from Undertale, and various new ones in sight, it's such a powerfully cozy way of introducing a world that seems so fresh, but familiar somehow. I adore this music because of all the spooky theatrics of the past 24 hours, and those ominous warnings of pain and seizure. We've been somewhat hoodwinked, haven't we? Have we just been pranked? Have we just been tricked into playing a really cute sequel to Undertale? What the hell were all those spooky theatrics for? Before we can process anything just yet though, Toriel leads the little human, Kris, into the school building, the loving goat mum giving her son a comforting hug as Kris heads to class. Kris heads in. The class is filled to the brim with different types of monsters, some familiar, some not. As there's a class project happening, Kris really needs to pair up with someone else or they'll end up alone in the process. Struggling to find a partner, Kris heads over to their childhood friend, Noelle, seeing if they can join the pairing the latter has made with another student, Birdly, who doesn't seem to particularly like Kris all that much. Just as Noelle is trying to ask the teacher, Alphys, for permission to form a trio, the door slams open. The funky music playing goes quiet. Everything grinds to a halt. The atmosphere is suddenly really frigid. A monster stands in the doorway, clad in a purple jacket, blue pants, purplish skin or scales. Enter Suzie, the class bully. Alphys, nervous by Susie's mere presence, begins to get on with the class. However, there's one big problem. The chalk to write on the chalkboard has gone mysteriously missing, which means the class can't really start. With no one able to give an answer as to where it's gone, Alphys tasks Suzie and Kris with going to the nearby supply closet to see if there's any more in there. Pairing the two up together for the class project, Alphys asks Kris to keep an eye on Suzie. With the pair of them heading off to get the chalk, Kris heads outside, trailing behind the intimidating girl, only to spot something in her hand. In her hand lies the very chalk that was missing from the class. Uneased at being discovered, Suzie begins to intimidate Kris, resulting in Kris getting slammed into a locker. Frazzled at being discovered, Suzie begins to become increasingly more threatening, eventually resulting in a scene that I'm sure uneased practically everyone playing for the first time, deciding that she'd rather get expelled for some real carnage than that of petty theft. Suzie threatens to bite Kris's face off. The music gets sharper, louder. Susie's teeth just inches away from the poor human's face, but she stops. Regaining her composure, Kris is dropped to the ground as Suzie reneges on the idea and heads to the supply closet to get the chalk and get back to class pronto, with Kris being the one to handle the class project. Silent as always, Kris follows behind, trailing behind, following her still. Trekking to the closet is an easy task for the two of them. I mean, it's just around the corner, but as things seem to be easy, their time together ending as soon as it begins, the closet door opens by itself. The area darkens, the inside of the small supply closet veiled in what feels like pitch black darkness. Unnerved, Kris follows an equally unnerved Suzie in as the pair of them walk inside, realising what's supposed to be a small room is in fact way more spacious than it seems. As they can't find the chalk, they head out, and the entrance vanishes. They're trapped inside. Panicking, Suzie hollers for the pair of them to be let out, thinking that someone's locked them in. The paper floor begins to crumble, the atmosphere becomes strange, the unlikely duo shuffling back as everything begins to collapse. It's no use though, as the pair of them fall into the darkness. In the darkness, there's the sound of a crash echoing throughout the area. The screen cuts from black to a scene of an unconscious Kris laid down on the strange surface. Where are we exactly? We don't know, but as the human awakens, their outfit has changed. Gone is the jumper and pants combination. Our protagonist is now clad in armour, a scarf and what seems to be a lycra suit. The brown and yellow of our human here is now shades of dark blue. What in the hell is going on? Things don't get any less strange from here though. Our protagonist at hand wanders through an ominous landscape of rock and strange markings, puzzles that block the path ahead, and strange environmental objects that dissipate at a moment's touch. The game itself seems to acknowledge that something is off. The music is ominous, anticipatory, like there's something waiting in the mist, in the darkness of this strange space. And that there is, as Kris regroups with Suzie. She's changed as well, her outfit manifesting from a jacket and baggier pants replaced with a jacket and pants rocking a more punk-esque style, clad in magenta and black. The pair of them are rightfully confused, rightfully wondering where the hell they even are, but stick together as they keep wandering through the strange location. Wandering far enough, they spot a figure up top on a cliff. Confused, they look up, and immediately get attacked. There's a brief chase as projectiles rain hell upon the pair of them, human and the dragon girl running for their lives as spade-like projectiles soar through the air, ready to chunk off parts of their health. Making a run for it, the pair of them slide down a cliff and avoid the turbulence of spade projectiles, landing deeper into this strange dark world, deeper into this strange land. Safety, for now. Wherever this is, it's strange, it's dangerous, and there's others here, and they don't seem friendly. Just as things begin to calm down, as if on cue, our odd duo come across a hooded figure who yearns for us to listen to their tale of the land they're on, the tale of which Kris and Suzie serve as heroes of light. As the player, you have the option to hear it or not, but what's the harm in learning? The hooded figure explains the legend of Deltarune, a legend that runs across the existence of light and dark itself, a legend of hope and dreams. As polar opposites to one another, a fine balance is kept between the two sides, keeping the world whole. However, if this balance would shatter, the world itself would begin to collapse, the earth drawing its final breaths in the process. Only the combination of a human, a monster, and a prince from the dark can return the world to a state of balance, of equilibrium, saving the world from complete annihilation. As of recent though, a fountain has been opened in the distance, beginning to shatter that very balance between light and dark. Our hooded figure here explains that Kris and Suzie are the heroes, the human and monster respectively, spoken of in the legend, with our hooded figure here serving as the Prince of the Dark. Suzie, however, isn't interested. She rejects the notion, startling our hooded entity as they attempt to get Suzie interested in the legend at hand. Before a discussion can be made, however, the hooded figure is punted off screen by a stranger figure, a new character. Here enters Lancer, the person who attacked our strange duo before, causing that chase scene. Amusingly eager to thrash you, Suzie, trigger happy, threatens the same back. Our first battle. I've been discussing the game's background and plot so far, but Jesus, I've gotta stop for a second and just talk about this particular part. I absolutely adore this introduction to the battle system. Building off of Undertale's mechanics of using non-violence to spare monsters or allowing you to use the system to enact violence for your own ends, what Undertale does is significantly updated and elaborated on in Deltarune through incentivizing you to use the expanded act system more. The act system is a system that allows you to use interaction via action with your enemies to influence the state of the battle, manipulating or influencing the behaviour of your opponent, allowing you to gain such results as warning them, finding out about their stats, or lowering their defences, or goading them into increasing their damage. While Undertale does offer these type of actions, what Deltarune does to elaborate on this is directly tying itself into the bullet hell battle system via a new mechanic in place, tension points. Via dodging attacks and being in the area of effect of the attacks, you can raise this meter further, allowing you to access more specialised actions in the act system that are later expanded on into such things as multi-healing your party, or forcing out more damaging, powerful attacks in the process. Concerning this battle with Lancer, it's such a clever implementation of the system. Through using the system instead of outright attacking, you can influence Lancer to lower his defences, or be warned of Suzie. As she's unwilling to spare enemies like you perhaps want to, the act system becomes a increasingly interesting puzzle for the first third of the game, involving how you peacefully resolve battles and keep to a path of non-violence without Suzie getting in your way, presenting you with a challenge of multitasking and handling how to resolve everything without the purple dragon going completely crazy, without violence, be it from yourself or not. While all this is happening though, oh my god, this music is fantastic. I'm no expert in music theory and the way Toby Fox composes, but the sheer upbeat nature of the track and the way that it incorporates itself into how frenetic and fast the encounter with Lancer is, just makes this a fantastic introduction to the battle system. It's energetic, funky, encouraging, almost teasingly exciting, as it encourages you to start playing with the new system at hand. As the battle progresses with Lancer throwing in new attacks, the music changes, becoming almost determined in a sense. I won't lie, I've spent way more time on this part of the game in repeat playthroughs just because it's such a damn good track. Not to mention really being a good way to keep up the momentum of admittedly how eccentric the game has been so far. Think about it, we started off with a spooky character creation menu, then a wholesome ride to school, classroom stuff, going with the class bully to a closet and then being sucked into a strange world, and then getting mobbed earlier on. Isn't it fitting that that crazy pace keeps up? I really love that there's a dissonant feel to Rude Buster. Covers of this song are so fascinating to me because since it's not exactly done on piano at times, it doesn't sound the same, making it an incredibly interesting song to try and remix. All of this comes together to create a first battle that really throws you into the midst of things, while also encouraging you to really experiment, treating battles less like a battle and more like a puzzle, in a sense. Anyway, let's get back on topic. The battle eventually ends as Lancer's motorbike runs out of fuel, forcing the strange Spade Boy to leave, seemingly intent on returning at some point. The battle grinding to a halt, the hooded figure returns. Suzie, finding that she can't hear the strange figure, goads him into taking his hood off. Complying, our hooded figure reveals themselves. He's so fluffy. Ah! This is Ralsei, and god is he just cute. Determined to play out the legend he's mentioned to Kris and Suzie in front of him prior, he attempts to get things right on track, to go ahead with things, get things sorted. Suzie, however, has other plans. With the exit to this strange, dark world to the southeast where the second fountain lies, she abandons the two of them, leaving Kris and Ralsei in each other's company. Happy Ang having seemingly waited his entire lifetime to meet Kris and Suzie, Ralsei is just happy to be in her company. Seems Suzie has no intention of playing along to the legend, leaving the fluffy stranger and the cyan-coloured human to begin their journey. There's not much left in this area. We can explore a little bit, interact with a few objects, even save if we backtrack a little bit. The power of fluffy boys shines within you. In the distance from where we've moved from lies the first fountain, its darkness soaring seep into the distant sky. It's hard to explain, but I feel that the music here is a good representation of that strangeness to this world. It's simple, almost like a song, soothingly simple, but there's something not quite complete with it. It's fitting that the track is called Empty Town in the official soundtrack, as aside from the Prince of the Dark following us and Kris, we're very much alone. What should be a bustling town with vendors and shops and NPCs like any other RPG or role-playing game to interact with is quiet, lonely. But I wonder if that will change. Moving to the right as we move past the save point, we can interact with Ralsei's dummy. You may choose to take a more in-depth tutorial concerning the battle system and acting, or you can say no and proceed forward. While things do move smoothly towards the right if you choose not to do the tutorial, choosing it does give you a more fleshed out introduction to how the new battle system works, how acting works, with Ralsei also teaching you the merits of defending, something that you wouldn't really have understood just from that first real battle alone. Interestingly, while Ralsei does allow you to attack the dummy, proceeding the tutorial along that way, you can actually forfeit this choice and choose more pacifistic options. This can result in being able to hug the dummy, eventually resulting in a hug towards the fluffy boy himself. I'll talk more on these cute little details soon, but it just goes to show that even with a system meant for resolving enemy conflict and resolving battles more like a puzzle than that of a traditional fight, you can play it however you wish, sometimes getting very cute results in the process. With the tutorial over, you can now proceed over to the right. On the right stands a looming giant door, open, beckoning the pair of us to come in. Ralsei describes it as the Great Door, the door to the journey really beginning, the start of the beginning of the adventure, a journey in which how people are treated will make all the difference. Wandering into the Great Door, Kris ventures into the darkness, Ralsei facing us one last time behind the door frames, as it closes for good. Welcome to the Dark World. I'm not going to detail the entire game through a step-by-step basis from here. What I've said so far is to present you with context, to present you with the general setup for why this game immediately hit a mark with people. The strange way it was introduced on Halloween, the 24-hour silence an entire fandom went through and processed, that strange sense of unity amongst strangers in an internet landscape where nowadays no one is very kind, or concerned about being spoiled on new things, and the general bizarre nature of this story so far, it hit a mark with people immediately off the bat. We had just been given an entire fresh new experience, an entire game it seems, for Halloween. Just what the hell was Toby planning? But all of this formed a perfect cocktail for why people were so transfixed, for why I got so transfixed by this game too, why I am still obsessed with it in a way. Think of it this way, as a fan of Undertale, getting a game like this on Halloween out for what felt like nowhere, out completely out of the blue, was such a damn treat. A new game, not a prequel or a sequel to Undertale. Undertale is known for its broad AU, alternate universe content by its fandom, so had Toby just made an AU of his own game? Not exactly, but if there was anything to go by, this was a different world, a different story entirely. If you play to the very end of the game and complete it, you get to find out what survey program is really called. For Undertale fans, the name on screen is familiar, but for anyone with a keen eye, scramble the letters to the word Undertale, and you've got Deltarune, a demo for a larger game. What we had seen was just its first chapter, not even a drop in the ocean of a product far larger. With everything I've mentioned, if you haven't played Deltarune, then perhaps these perspectives, others and my own, seem a bit strange to you. I really recommend trying the game out for yourself, for what it is, regardless of if you've played Undertale or not, as it's very much its own thing that you can experience regardless of Undertale's influence. With all said and done, why is it that even just a single chapter of, so far, a 2 out of 7 chapter game managed to make such a powerful splash? What is it about the game itself that brings people in beyond what I've said before, beyond the context that I have provided? Let's go into detail on that, shall we? structure. Deltarune Chapter 1, the demo survey program, is absolutely fascinating for the way that it is structured. That sounds strange, but hear me out. The story itself that we're given in this first chapter, hell, basically every aspect, is built on this concept of imagination coming to life, of fantasy colliding with reality. That endless feeling of imagination I mentioned at the beginning of this video wraps around the entire skeleton, the basis of what makes this chapter so great. It's evident from the start. Kris and Suzie go from their regular lives, a shy human and a class bully, to a storage closet to get some chalk, but things immediately go awry with the pair of them being trapped inside and falling into a completely different world, in a very Alice in Wonderland-like fashion. Kris and Suzie end up separated for a brief moment, but the pair of them walk through strange landscapes of blocks with ominous inscriptions of eyes embedded into its very walls, becoming more detailed as the two progress, almost like the imagination that makes this land is beginning to heat up, thaw, come back to life. It's further exacerbated by the sudden chase Lancer gives them, leading them into what would usually be your standard RPG hub world, a shop for items, a shop for weapons, a shop for healing stuff, so on, except there's no one here. Just like in the OST, it's an empty town, thawing. That hooded figure, Ralsei, who ends up being not only the speaker of the legend to Kris and Suzie, but a third part of the prophecy of heroes itself, is very much like self-inserting into a story, while also acting as the wise mage of the party, the healer. Even in Ralsei's role in the game, the battle system invests the tension points mechanic, which allows him to act as, again, the healer of the eventual group that consists of him, Kris and Suzie. Kris and Suzie take on their own roles too, as if their thought slot into an imaginative fantasy of being the knight and the dragon in a fairy tale, yet their roles also working to create the traditional party structure in something like, say, D&D, Dungeons & Dragons. The world itself is also strangely adaptive, almost thawing and shape-shifting in a sense, like a narrative in a fantasy land is causing to begin it to change. Ominous blocky landscapes with eyes that have been carved into the walls, an empty castle town and hub where a singular prince who waited his whole life rests, a small tutorial room with a mannequin. Beyond the great door, vivid forests shaped in indigo blades of grass and magenta pink trees lies ahead, sprawling with vividly strange and spectacular enemies. One area is akin to a checkerboard, surrounded by strange entities shaped after what seem to be pieces of a checker/chessboard. Forests upon forests in redder leaves and tall trees surround a strange castle, guarding the second fountain that disrupts the peace and order of both worlds light and dark. The game initially introduces us to the card castle via Kris, Suzie and Ralsei being locked up in the cells. From here, ascending up the elevators and stairs shows us the ominous, almost eerie atmosphere of the high guarded castle. The very peak of the castle is flat, overlooking a fountain of pure darkness, where the trio of legend face off against Lancer's father, the Spade King. The path after is simple, almost too simple, solitary, very much like those starting blocks, like the imagination of the world itself is beginning to go cold once more as the journey begins to come to a close. And then, Kris and Suzie return to the light world, aka the real world, in Deltarune. The pair of them question if what they had even been through was real, although the game does not give you a clear-cut answer for this. What is fascinating though is the fact that the idea of the structure of the dark world itself is very much influenced by everything around the empty classroom itself. A checkerboard, various pieces that allude to certain characters that you can find around the world itself, strewn cards, all of these representing some kind of piece of the dark world and what they've both just experienced. While Chapter 2 does answer this in the form of the NPCs and characters you've met filling the now less empty castle town, it's interesting that from a structural perspective, both the player and Kris and Suzie are pulled into a world that, almost like a tabletop game or Dungeons & Dragons, or any good story that begins, the world itself thaws and opens up, shifts a little bit, changes. Structurally, there's also a very much strange, powerful magnetic pull with Deltarune, even as just a single chapter demo. There's an immediate magnetic pull to this general idea of a world that develops as you walk through it, a story that develops in a particularly tabletop-esque way. Like, the plot itself has structure, yet parts are being improvised, like that of a play. All the world is a stage, after all. How a familiar world with some potential ties to Undertale is able to flip expectations of players on its head, introducing entirely new concepts in the process. While Deltarune shares its DNA with Undertale in a few ways, Deltarune's DNA is almost entirely unique. The plot also fits in this regard. There's a certain fluent whimsy to the world we've been presented within Deltarune. I mentioned Alice in Wonderland as an offhand comparison before, but comparing it to Fallen into the Dark World is an immediate parallel, a comparison point. As soon as Kris and Suzie enter the closet, the normality of the game disintegrates as they're thrusted into what's considerably similar to most depictions of Wonderland within media, let alone the source material. Everything about Deltarune is magnetic in the sense that it's almost antithetical to most typical games in this sort of style, in that its spontaneity and whimsy is surprisingly light in comparison to Undertale, and refreshingly endearing because it's unafraid to be itself. The halfway point of the game emphasises this the most. After meeting up with Suzie again and proceeding through a door that requires the three of them to get past, the three end up on a checkerboard path where stepping on the wrong places warps you back to the start. Getting past and avoiding literal enemies based on chess pieces and checkerboard pieces, the three encounter Lancer once again. The following scene is a strange yet amusing dialogue between Suzie and Lancer. The former confused at why the strange Spade Kid looks up to Suzie so much, while Lancer is pretty much joyous at her presence. For context, Susie's attempts to be threatening towards him in the first quarter of the game unintentionally made her cool in the little guy's eyes. The game then proceeds to divert into naming your team at the halfway point in the game. You're given a bunch of options, all of which name your team something unique that other characters in the game will refer to you all as. And this option lasts, by the way. You can choose a neat paper, a crumpled paper, or a Lancer labelled paper. Choosing any gives you a unique name that stays with you for the rest of the game. If you choose the crumpled paper, the game proceeds to call you the Fox Squad. It's censored, but come on, it's obvious what it is. After this scene, you're left to proceed through the rest of the chessboard area until you encounter Lancer again, this time triggering a boss battle between you and a giant checker. This game is absolutely bonkers, but I love it for that reason. But that example is a single sliver of the strange, almost odd spontaneity this game has, where the game can go from simple puzzles and getting past strange enemies, to meeting with a character that in any other game would be a villain or a simple NPC, to spending time with them and making crucial decisions with them, to then getting into a boss battle out of nowhere. It's that sporadic, fast pace that makes Deltarune feel very much like a tabletop game, or a D&D game, Alice in Wonderland-like, where anything can happen if you proceed through deep enough into the game. It's got a level of unpredictability that I've never seen in any other games. A level of unpredictability that does not exist in Undertale, in my opinion. Let's mention a really specific example in terms of the plot. Lancer, after he temporarily joins your team, Kris, Suzie, ralsei, and Lancer end up waltzing through the forest, leading up to the Card Castle. It's been the source of the second fountain that threatens the balance of light and dark, as stated in the legend. Everything seems fine, except Lancer is not. Throughout the entire game, there's been a consistent running theme of Susie's behaviour. During the first third of the game, the battle and axe system give you the option to explore it and thus warn your enemies of Suzie. As you proceed through the area after the Great Door, you found that certain enemies on the overworld you're walking through have been absolutely pulverised by her. One NPC, Top Chef, laments his cake's destruction, as it seems Suzie has pulverised that too. There's this running theme of Susie's violent behaviour being a detriment, that there's a better way to handle things. Interesting tonal shift from Undertale. Whereas that game has most of the NPCs acting violent towards you, with the main puzzles being how you handle diffusing these situations and getting the best outcome for everyone involved, including yourself, Deltarune knows you have this choice from the get-go. with the main pull of the act system being how you handle Suzie and your enemies, the greatest puzzle in the game really. You can't prevent her from directly attacking in most cases, having to warn your enemies, and there's always a chance they won't listen to you as well. From the get-go, Suzie has been portrayed through her own actions and inferences from other characters, such as her classmates and even her teacher, as a violent tormentor. Her mentality through 80% of the demo, aka Chapter 1, is to essentially speedrun, attack and destroy to get back home. She's seen as a monster, an evil person by others for what she's done to others in the past, and what she's been like as a person, shunned by others, speaking so negatively on others and herself that it's worrisome. But here's where it gets complicated. Lancer, despite growing to be best friends with Suzie, is the son of the Spade King, the ruler of the Card Castle, the one keeping the second fountain protected and active. Fearing that Suzie and his dad would only end up killing each other, he runs away, causing the gang to give chase, only for them to get trapped by the king's army and knocked out. They're locked in the deepest parts of the castle's prison, with Lancer asking the guards to keep them there forever so that no such potential bloodshed can ever happen. Suzie, breaking out and finding Lancer, ends up misunderstanding him. Her camaraderie with the strange card kid, in her eyes, is broken. Nah, I get it. Why would anyone really want to be my friend anyway? Lancer attempts to explain, but Suzie, despairing, resorts to the one thing she knows as an outlet: violence. Misunderstanding Lancer, she does something that no other character in either Undertale or Deltarune has done: engages in battle without the player. Except, you have no control here. You've been controlling Kris through the entire game. You've been held hostage, essentially, by this very system you're using to warp the fate of your adventure. Now restrained and forced to see Suzie act out without your influence, without your intervention. It's not often that a game makes me panic. I don't panic often, if at all in games. There's moments from games where I fear falling into a pit that never seems to end, or fighting a boss that might be near invincible. But there's always this determination to get past it, to get over the boundary, but very rarely do I feel genuine stomach-churning fear, especially from a game like this. During this entire section, Suzie misunderstands Lancer, striking the poor boy over and over with her incredibly damaging battle axe. Suzie proceeds to talk over while she repeatedly strikes the boy over and over, angry, furious even. The battle window pops up in between turns, Lancer throwing out spades that merely orbit the soul, not directly trying to attack. She strikes, 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 strikes. Suzie's theme heard as the scene plays out. A theme of anger, of despairing over how she's seen, of taking it out on someone. She feels betrayed her. She notices he's not fighting back. He shakes as he's taking repeated damage, far sturdier than we've been led to believe, but he looks like he's on his last knees. Lancer's attacks are getting weaker and weaker. Alright, that's enough. If you want to die so much, then die! Suzie strikes for the final time, but she missed. Lancer stands there, awaiting a final blow. He notes that she missed. The violent tormentor, the girl we've seen as a monster by everyone else, a ruffian. She begs for Lancer to move past, let her go past. Her exterior remains rough, but she decides to be honest. She admits she doesn't want to kill him. Her posture kneeling, face even more hidden by her hair. Her toughness, her exterior, it's shattering by the second. Lancer finally gets a word in, finally manages to explain why he kept her down here. Genuinely terrified she and her dad will die if they meet, that their conflict will end in absolute tragedy. It's here where the rough exterior of the bully, seen by everyone, disintegrates. Suzie vows to resolve things peacefully, leading to her beginning to understand ralsei's words from before, vowing to be the team member they need, the monster in the prophecy, to ensure that the balance between light and dark can be restored. I fucking love this part of the game. The way it's structured, the way that plot threads such as Susie's behaviour and the prophecy collide, how Suzie grows as a person through her own errors, that spontaneity to the plot that I've mentioned, the structure, the flexibility of the plot, that magnetic pull is in full force here. The game so far has just been wandering between that of frolicking in a fantasy world found within a closet, and the looming threat of the destabilization of two realities that need each other to coexist. That's what the game's been about so far. What it's been switching between tonally. Like a tabletop game or a fairy tale, the plot threads of a narrative created, constantly shifting and changing, random events happening and humorous events inbound. The game's been tonally consistent to a degree, but very sporadic and random. But when the darker elements of each plot thread collide, the player is forced to understand that this fantasy world isn't without consequences, just like a D&D game, just like a tabletop game. I especially love that during this whole scene, the player is given the battle menu, but they're not actually allowed to control anything that happens here. It's terrifying, actually. In a game where we were introduced with the notion that our choices don't matter, that we can't change anything that's already in place, we're stripped of our command of one of the things we become so innate with, a system that's supposed to be under our command. Suzie acts on her own, nearly killing her best friend in the process, the tone and the atmosphere dripping in this sense of dread, the fear of loss of control. Adding to this is the one thing that we can do, move the soul around as Lancer attacks. It's not even Susie's soul either, it's the soul that we've come to know as a human one, Kris's. Something I find interesting about this design decision is that one thing that we can choose to do is avoid attacks, sure, but for anyone like me, for a lot of players of the game, we chose to do the inverse of the usual gameplay loop. We wanted to stop Suzie, so we intentionally threw the soul into Lancer's attacks, causing Lancer to deliberately avoid us more and more in his attacks. The only thing we could do is damage Suzie enough to try and get her to desperately stop. But our choices here, regardless of the control we have, don't matter. Suzie acts out on her own. And that's a terrifying inversion of mechanics we've been introduced to. It's such a beautiful collision of plot, atmosphere and structure, how stripping the control that we've become so used to through the way that this game is structured, both in terms of the plot and both in terms of the game, how that can be completely scary in its own right. The rest of the game returns to its usual spontaneity, encountering quirky NPCs along the way, a rematch with the checker from before thanks to an NPC, ascending up the castle until eventually, the Fox Squad comes across the Spade King. I mentioned with the previous example that the idea of fantasy and imagination collide with the darker elements of the plot, that the two coalesce. The same can be said here. Encountering the Spade King, he's furious to find that his son has allowed the trio of the legend, the Lightners, to get this far. Furious at his son's kindness towards those he considers as threats to the second fountain, he holds Lancer up by the neck, causing the trio, especially Suzie, to snap, yelling at the king to let Lancer go. The king with the upper hand, however, forces them all to kneel, otherwise he'll drop Lancer off of the edge of the castle to his death. Conceding, the trio kneel as the king prepares to dispatch them, but Lancer strikes the king and allows the trio to confront the Spade King once and for all. The battle with the king is perhaps one of the other interesting aspects of how the fantasy of imagination collides with structure alongside the rest of the game. The battle against Spade King is clever, serving multiple purposes. I've repeatedly mentioned that the pull of Deltarune very much lies in the way structure and plot and imagination and fantasy create a certain sense of whimsy and adventure, akin to a D&D game or something tabletop-esque. But here's where it shows intently. Like any end to such games, the final boss is here, a big, intimidating final boss, looming, threatening, a stomach maul that makes no sense at all, almost mockingly jeering at you as you're trying to process this murderous, violent person in front of you, who wants you dead for sure. His attacks are strong, potent, knocking significant chunks off of your health. If you haven't found items for defense, you may very well might be in trouble. Like Suzie in the prior example of plot and imagination as one, the king details his abandonment by the Lightners sometime before, how a knight, quote-unquote, showed them the way, destabilizing the balance between light and dark for the sake of revenge. This fight is extremely clever as a pull into the game, despite being so late in. It's a parallel of Susie's fight prior to be the root result of whether you choose violence or pacifism, more on that in a second, and presenting the endgame of an imaginative story or a D&D game. Like in those games, again, it serves as the final boss between you and the completion of the narrative, resolving the world's issue that serves to pull you into the story that's been so spontaneous and on the spot. Everything in your fun little adventure with moments of humour and moments of darkness have led to the man, the king, that stands literally between you and the exit of this world, the end of the campaign. The fountain can only be sealed by Kris, after all, and you control them. Everything you've learned with the axe system and the battle system is useful here. Use the axe system to improve your magic and axe through the tension points, avoid getting damaged, heal your teammates, survive the king's increasingly damaging attacks, survive, survive, survive. And that you do. Regardless of how you proceed here, eventually you best him. He's worn down, tired, and damaged, it seems. Taking pity on the king for his story and his weakened state, his intent to submit and see things in a more pacifistic way, Ralsei heals him, and it backfires almost instantly. The king uses the opportunity to strike the trio down, Ralsei getting the brunt of it while Kris, without the player's control, jumps in front of Suzie to protect her. It doesn't stop them both from getting hit, however, creating an interesting moment. Walking up to Kris, the king holds Kris up by the cuff of their outfit. Not saying anything, the king echoes Susie's words from the very start of the game. Quiet people piss me off. Suzie strikes the king from behind. He drops Kris. Susie's changed into the hero Ralsei believed her to be. Her eyes, hidden throughout the entirety of the game, are now revealed. Yellow, determined, visible. The king goads her into attacking. She refuses, however, smirking at the king. She won't do anything, but everyone you've spared on your pacifist run, they've come to your aid. Lancer becomes the new king, putting his dad in the very prison you all occupied once. Everyone you spared, interacted with, helped, is helping you in return, hailing you as a hero, as heroes even. Lancer and the others have come to your aid. With danger out of the way, Ralsei, Suzie, and Kris gather up. Ralsei apologises to Suzie and Kris for healing the king, for being naive, for assuming that everyone could be fully won over by pacifism. Suzie, changed from her experience in the Dark World, however, from everything, admits that there's sometimes just people you have to fight, but that if you never let your guard down at all, then there's a chance you'll hurt someone you really care for. Now, this is where I'll stop speaking on this part of the game, more on it later. For anyone who's familiar with the game, you may have been ripping your hair out a little bit. For those who've never played the game though, you may be confused as to why I'm just randomly stopping right now. See, this is where I mention details I've decided not to say before, for good reason. Because this plot isn't exactly linear. Not exactly. In fitting with the structure and plot of the game, with the idea that the game is very much akin to fluctuating imagination, like a D&D game, like a kid's imagination, and the idea of constantly fluctuating and changing, it's only befitting that the game itself is like this, but you have to, well, find it. See, at the very start of this video, at the very start of detailing how this game begins, the notion of not being able to choose who we are in this world, how our choices don't matter, is a demeaning notion. The idea that we can't do anything to exactly influence our fate in this universe is quite the oxymoron. While it's true that the game operates linearly, like a D&D game, like a fairy tale, there are deviations. One story can deviate depending on the interaction, or rather the way it's seen or interpreted. You've been given this notion that you can't change your fate, but that's not entirely true to an extent. I've only been discussing the pacifist version of events. What happens in the route where you choose to actually use the battle system? Things do change. How much though? Not much, but it does have its effects. If you choose to attack enemies and follow the route of violence like Suzie, dialogue, interactions, a lot of that changes. The king, in his sneak attack on the gang, goads Suzie into further attacking him. Unlike her confidence in the pacifist route, she seems less confident. But Suzie, remembering Ralsei's pacify spell, manages to use it, pacifying the king and making him sleep. At the very end, nobody comes to your aid, only Lancer and his curiosity. The entire Dark World seems to have clambered into the throne room, not to help you, but in disarray, with ralsei encouraging you to head away from the area to seal the fountain pretty ASAP. The notion of the structure changing depending on if you choose pacifism or violence is, however, not indicative of the secret boss that's hidden within the Dark World too. According to the official D&D site, Dungeons & Dragons, a typical game of the format consists of a DM, a dungeon master. To quote it directly, the DM presents information about the adventure to players, which includes things like describing where the adventurers are, narrating actions that occur around them, describing obstacles or puzzles that may be in their path, role-playing as the supporting characters in the story, usually referred to as non-player characters, or NPCs. Why am I mentioning this though? All throughout describing the pull of the plot to players and why it's interested so many who've played it, I've made a few allusions to the game's structure being akin to a tabletop game, or Alice in Wonderland, fiction, creating that fiction. Even the Dark World itself is almost thawing in a sense as you enter it for the first time. It's akin to someone warming up to create fiction for others to intake. Kris, Suzie, or perhaps the player themselves. Maybe the scattered objects in the abandoned classroom are a sign of that. Perhaps. Where the line blurs with this is when you take into account a secret quest that exists within the Dark World, almost separate from either version of events you can choose to undertake. Scattered through the Dark World and its lands are pieces of a key. Scattered long ago, the key is the way to unlock access to a secluded area of the card castle, where a prisoner long locked away awaits. If you go into the deepest part of the castle, you can find a stranger who remains locked inside their cell, cryptically speaking to you, beckoning you to open it. If you choose to hunt down the key pieces, your quest will lead you back to a particular ominous NPC named Sean, who's usually just there to give lore to the world, another D&D illusion, but he's aware of the prisoner. He's a cat, long aware of the discontent in the land, older than most of the entities within it, his design indicative of that. He serves to be a shopkeep, providing you lore to the world, items for each route, and health pickups, among other things. And if you keep encountering the prisoner and wish to unlock their cell, a key piece. Acquiring it and the other pieces and tracking down a very specific NPC who's able to fix broken items, you'll get a key that's complete enough to unlock the cell. Return to the cell, unlock it, and you'll meet the stranger inside, or to them, outside. A jester trapped inside a cell for God knows how long, where he believes he's the only one free, and that everyone else is trapped. A jester who speaks in cryptic, ominous rhymes, jovial, happy. A jester who wants to play a simple game, a numbers game. Once you drop to 0, the game is over. Welcome to the secret boss. Welcome to the insanity that is Jevil, the secret boss of this demo / chapter 1. A boss way harder, trickier, crazier than even the Spade King or any battle prior. A character where the arena spins around him in insanity, a corrupted mirage of a carousel visible as you evade an onslaught of attacks that always seem to be random and never consistent fully. Our secret boss here uses every type of card attack you've already seen plus more, deliberately targeting ralsei to snuff out your healing, his attacks damaging and brutal for anyone unprepared. Attack patterns so fast and sporadic that they're hard to predict. This is an insanely brutal boss fight, far harder than the Spade King. Now you know why this crazy son of a bitch was locked away. I can't deny that I've died several times on different playthroughs just to beat this guy. Would I recommend it? I'll let you decide that. Something that I want to point out as a quick side note is that at the time when Deltarune released as just Survey Program or Chapter 1, the main thing that people were talking about was obviously the game, but also the fact that Jevil existed to begin with. Because most people didn't expect a secret boss to be found from a really obscure, at the time, side quest to recover a bunch of key pieces to then give to a really obscure NPC that most players on the pacifist run of the game wouldn't have even gone to because you don't use weapons in that run. Jevil was practically a myth at the time that the demo came out. So imagine the shock on people's faces when, after this really cryptic side quest, where they had to literally go out of bounds at points, or at least the equivalent of out of bounds in the logic of the game and the logic of the story, the campaign of play. Imagine doing all of that and then being met with a boss that people to this day still consider harder than Sans from Undertale, and if you know anything about Undertale, you know just how difficult Sans really is. I think it's a testament to Jevils' presence in the game that to this day you can find videos on YouTube, some of the very first fan content of Deltarune out there, teaching you how to beat him. Because people like me, I died 50 times before I got my first win on Jevil, and I have never attempted it since. You wanna know the last time that I tried attempting Jevil? 2019. Yeah, we're in 2024 as of this video, so I think that's very telling, don't you think? That with this crazy weird side quest, people were surprised by a boss that absolutely mollywopped them for the most part. Regardless of if you choose pacifism or violence against Jevil, the Jester will ominously warn you about future chapters, mentioning entities such as the Queen and the Knight, respectively for each outcome. Speaking to Sharm, you'll learn just who this strange Jester really was. The shopkeeper and the Jester have some history. They used to work with each other as court jesters, serving the Card Kingdom, until the Jester encountered a strange someone. The Jester's view of the world had been shattered, altered, eventually causing those in charge to lock him away for the rest of time inside a cell, the only one who thinks they're free while everyone else is trapped. While mentions of a queen are interesting, the mention of a knight is even more so. Not only does it serve to be foreshadowing, but it's also indicative of a meta-narrative that may exist. In a world where our choices apparently don't matter, someone else is out there making choices of their own, influencing our playthroughs, or rather our campaign. Another DM, Dungeon Master, making choices without us knowing. Well, it can be said that all these secret details are very much just to add to the plot, to add hints for future chapters and future plot threads. The idea that there's an entity out there in this universe, influencing these dark worlds, and thus our own playthroughs, our own campaigns, is an ominous detail to say the least. The air truly does crackle with freedom. Hey there, welcome to the break section of the video. I'm putting this section in mainly because you've been, watching for about an hour or so now? I didn't expect this video to actually be that long, but I had a lot to talk about and I have a lot to say, so to those who are still here watching, thank you kindly. This is a pretty big passion project of mine. I wanted to make a video about how I feel about this game and just my kind of take on it. My kind of retrospective look at survey program and chapter 1, because eventually we're going to get future chapters and I might forget all of these thoughts, so I thought it'd be a good idea to put them all into something tangible and nice. But anyway, enough rambling about me. Thank you for your support so far and watching the video, and please, if you haven't already, take a little bit of a break if you need. Go get a cup of tea, stretch your legs, whatever you do. Just keep yourself in good shape, like I have been during the editing of this video. Goodness, that was a lot to talk about, but it's fitting to do so. The game's plot and the vagueness, the foreshadowing, the implication of something deeper in the darkness of the dark world that this game takes most of its time in, is an interesting pull. Something different, but similar enough to Undertale in that regard. Undertale has its fair share of mysteries, secrets, but Deltarune cranks this up a notch with a world that's similar, yet different enough to feel like its own kind of worms in the process. In a world where it seems that fantasy elements come to life, where a campaign is created in a very D&D-esque way, where there's someone or something that's driving the plot forward as much as we the player are, it's not too unreasonable to understand that is genuinely interesting to people. When you show people enough of something to create interest and create a world that fits with the magic of imagination and thinking on it, it resonates with people. I've mentioned structure and plot, but what else drives people to this game? music. This game's OST is phenomenal. Genuinely phenomenal. Toby Fox is a genuinely fantastic composer. That can be said from his history of making music prior, not even just taking into account the work he did in Undertale. It's very easy for me to sit here fawning over the latter game's OST, but while I enjoy Undertale's soundtrack, Deltarune really hits the spot for me personally. Ooh, it does. The compositions and tracks on display really add to the idea that we've been given through structure and plot, that this is a different but similar world to Undertale, but it has its own identity too, that it has its own mechanics of interest. Let's go over some of the OST. I say some, as the OST is quite huge for a single chapter or the demo, and I'd rather also implore you to have your own thoughts on the OST too. I don't want to fill your head with my opinions. In fact, nah. After this, go and listen to the OST yourself. And while I'm not covering chapter 2 in this video, you can go listen to that as well, because it's also absolutely peak. This game does a genuinely impressive job at expressing that feeling of fantasy and wonder, that freshness to the game, through the OST. The track that this game starts on, In the Darkness, the very thing people heard back in 2018 on Halloween, it's ominous, with clever use of samples from Earthbound giving you an equally uneasy feeling to it. For anyone with a keen ear, or if you've played Earthbound, you'll immediately recognise the samples as the noises played during the Gygus boss battle. The name, Another Hymn, is as vague as the track is spooky. It really sells the feeling that what you're playing is some kind of virus, something that's gonna really fucking scare you. Really spooky. And Toby knows what he's doing. That motif that's in Another Hymn, it's unsettlingly similar to that of a track in Undertale. An unused track, nonetheless, but a track commonly associated with one of Undertale's final unsolved mysteries, Gaster, a character who's implied to have existed once, but now no longer does. It's fitting for a game impersonating a virus or something spooky like this. Using a motif that puts chills in any Undertale fan invested in the lore of the game is what Toby used for an introduction. It's incredibly fitting. There's a certain vapour feeling to the audio, especially while wearing headphones. It's like smog, like it's surrounding you, watching you from all sides, all angles. It's genuinely unsettling, especially when combined with the visual presentation. Beginning and School are tracks that, while I don't listen to very much, I do enjoy because they're just so upbeat and jovial that they introduce you to the different feel of the world. A lot of the music in Undertale, while upbeat and jovial in its own sense, is laden in a certain tone of history or elegance, trying to add to the world in that way. Deltarune's tracks, such as Beginning and School, however, are fittingly upbeat and joyous, which makes sense because it's the start of a school day. Loved these two. Personally, it's hard not to get a bit nostalgic when I hear them, as they would be what you'd hear as soon as you start a playthrough. Is what I heard at the start of my very first playthrough. Susie's theme is what I consider to be a damn well introduction to the character. She's portrayed so far at this point in the game as a rough bully feared by most others. Holding Kris up by the neck, pinning them to the lockers as her theme plays, makes the atmosphere just dripping in tension. Funnily enough, I assumed that it would be Kris confronting Suzie in my very first playthrough, a sign of my long experiences from Undertale, and let's just say, alarm bells are ringing in my head from certain routes of Undertale Chara. I think it's a cute detail that her theme is almost directly opposite in tone of Lancer's, though both of their themes begin in similar ways. Fitting, considering they're friends. I love that attention to detail. The chase is just oozing intention. It's such a good track, and it makes the idea that the quiet kid and the school bully are truly in another world entirely all the more emphasised. It's a great scene setter. The next two I've already mentioned somewhat, but I'll give them a good shout out nonetheless. I like to be fair. Rude Buster is an absolute banger, and it's no wonder why it's such a beloved track with a ton of remixes despite that dissonant feel to it, which ironically makes it work. I recall that I sat there and just listened to the track for a while, first time I'd ever heard it. It stunned me, genuinely. I know that sounds really corny to say, but you ever hear so good that it just stops you in place? Well, that's what I'm talking about. It's so funky, so upbeat, it's got so much oomph to it, you know? It's absolutely perfect for Lancer being the first NPC you fight. It's absolutely fitting that you can also pin certain parts of the track to the squad themselves. Kris as the start of the song, ralsei as the middle, and then Suzie as the deviation in notes that really loop back to the start. Empty Town is just a gorgeous little track that conveys the thawing of imagination. Put on ice, beginning to return to life. The typicalities of an RPG, a role-playing game, a campaign, have yet to really warm up just yet, and it's fitting that you meet Ralsei here too. A mage-esque character, a healer. Wouldn't you want to buy items from this town to prepare for your big journey into the beyond? The legend is one of my favourites. It's what greets you on repeat playthroughs of the game, and it sets up the plot and prophecy pretty well, with this grandiose feel of heroism, conveyed by the very NES-esque sound, with the more triumphant snares here and there. It really hits, and hearing it for the first time in Ralsei's speech was genuinely crazy to me back then. It felt like I was stumbling into something truly special. Field of Hopes and Dreams is pretty freaking good. It's really got a spring in its step, that vibe and feeling like you've started a huge world-bearing journey. There's a feeling of joviality to it, despite the fact that the fate of the world really depends on Kris, ralsei and Suzie, despite at this point in the game she's not really on that path. I just wish it kept playing while you encountered enemies, although it would be sad not to hear more of Rude Buster. Weird Birds is pretty short, but I like the fact that it's ambient. It's a nice break from the more structure-composed tracks, and it always plays around points in your big adventure where the tone of the game itself and the tone of the antics slows down a bit and allows the player and the character to really have some breathing room to process the antics going on. I think Toby was aware of this. Perhaps it's a really weird comparison, but it actually reminds me of this cute little show from the late 60s to early 70s called The Clangers. It's a cute little show about what's essentially space mice, who make their very cute whistle-like noises while voiceover narrates events going on. The noises in Weird Birds very much remind me of that cute little show.
And try and catch it.
Lantern is just beautiful. It's really fitting of a shopkeeper, someone that helps you through selling their wares. Cat has wares if you have coin, or dark dollars, I guess. There's this feeling of mysticism to Sean's shop, to Sean themselves, really conveyed within the grandiose feeling, the grandness of the track. It really feels like you stumbled onto something almost magical feeling, wise, old, older than you, older than the Dark World perhaps. It's super fitting when you ask questions about the Dark World too, actually, now that I think about it, while this track plays. Like, you've really found a chance to learn more about the world, flesh it out from your perspective. It really aligns with the fantasy elements going on. Checker Dance is just plain goofy. Not one of my favourites actually, but it visually fits with the insanity of going up against a goddamn checker. Actually, now that I think about it, it reminds me of this fan game that got made around the time that Deltarune Chapter 1, the demo survey program, released, where you had to throw a ralsei as far as you could to get the furthest distance. Good stuff, go play it, it's still really fun to play nowadays. Quiet Autumn is just cozy. Really feels like a checkpoint, in a way. Like a save point. Like the ones from Smash Bros, actually, though quieter. It's simple, quiet, and it's a nice moment of calm, a moment to calm down, and really relax from the chaos of going through the dark world. I like that it shares that ambience in a way that's similar to Weird Birds, but not quite the same. Thrash Machine is just as goofy as Checker Dance, if you want me to be honest, if not for the fact that it's literally the most polite sounding track in the game for a fluffy boy and a human literally designing machine to kick their own asses with, thanks to the antics of Suzie and Lancer. Kinda hope for more tracks like this to appear in future Deltarune chapters. It's always fun having really strange comparative tracks like this, whereas everything else is really grandiose or elegant or a bit mischievous, this is just polite. Now, I've already spoken on the battle between Suzie and Lancer, and while I like Basement and Imminent Death for their way of creating vicious tension that stems from Suzie, versus Suzie is one of my favourites. So good for conveying that crippling, bleak despair of a girl who really doesn't want to be the way people see her as, but is forced to for whatever background reason drives her existence to be so. The average playthrough of this part of the game lasts almost as long as the track, and I think that's a really cool touch. Okay, some of you who like Deltarune will either be really angry with me that I haven't mentioned him, or just as confused as to who I'm mentioning right now. Listen, okay, I was saving this for the moment. Rules card is one of the funniest fucking things in this game, and this theme is just the cherry on that cake. Bring this motherfucker back for the next chapters, I beg you, Toby.
I'm making fucking mac and cheese, and nobody can stop!
Hip Shop is that one track you've heard in the 4-hour YouTube video you probably watched that appears most likely 20 minutes in at the start or when they're shilling their merch to you. No shade, by the way. Everyone and their mother uses this track as interstitial music, and honestly, no shade why, no judgment why either, I think it's great. I've done it before myself, so I don't know why we would say this. It's kind of a nice contrast to Lantern now I think about it, and Charm, with Rules being the complete opposite of the ominous court jester cat. It really conveys this sense of smugness, royalty actually, while also showing that while Rules is a bit of a, excuse my British, twat, he's a lovable twat. Card Castle has always been interesting to me. I always had a feeling that it felt familiar to me in a way, and that's because subconsciously I was always thinking back to a game from my personal past. I always thought it reminded me of Wario's Castle, the penultimate track of Super Mario Land 2, 6 golden coins. The idea of travelling through a deadly castle in both games with chiptune music, the difficulty being evident being the largest comparison points. Side note for a second. Jesus Christ, Wario was terrifying in that game. The guy ate up more lives than anything else in that game. Same with the sheer difficulty of platforming through that fucking level. I have to wonder if Toby intentionally modelled Card Castle after Wario's Castle from that game, because they're both equally difficult in their own right, and they absolutely will catch new players off guard. Back to the music, though, goodness. Gallery is a great interlude to Chaos King, just oozing intention. And for a character obsessed with destabilizing the order of light and dark and taking revenge on the Lightners who wronged him apparently, it's very appropriate. Utilizing motifs throughout the game. Really feels like a final boss theme. The last track I want to mention for this specific section of this video is Darkness Falls. Maybe this is the Mandela effect coming into play, but I swear to God, barely anyone in the Deltarune fandom has ever heard of this track. In fact, I'm pretty sure that barely anyone knew it existed, that it was even a part of the game until the soundtrack got put up online, be it through unofficial rips or Bandcamp or official sources. Not only will most people never say no on the game over screen, which would usually trigger this track to play, but if people wanted to quit the game, they just hold the escape key down and close the game entirely. Hearing this track is chilling, is beautiful, really beautiful, but the implications are genuinely kind of heartbreaking. You give up on Kris to hear this. Darkness falls, the world ends. Not with a bang, not even with a whimper, but just a melody. Darker, darker, yet darker. It feels like a bad end track, like a campaign that's gone into dark territory, too dark for everyone's liking. Like a fatal error has occurred. Considering that this game was initially disguised as a mock virus, I can imagine that for anyone who decided to quit out, hearing this must have been a genuine bit of a scare, because it doesn't feel like something that you would expect to hear at a game over screen. It's way too peaceful, and quite frankly, no one wants to see darkness fall here, do they? It's all too fitting for the game, now that I think about it. But it's a damn good track that I don't see many people talk about, so that's why I decided to talk about it here. With speaking on the music of the game, I feel it's only fitting to turn my attention towards what I consider one of the more impactful parts of the game. One of the most impactful parts of the game. So allow me to waffle on for a little bit. If you're on the pacifist route, you can say goodbye to nearly everyone. You get a ceremonious ending, being able to chat with NPCs, Lancer, everyone. Set to the track of friendship. It's just so full of optimism, something that everyone feels at your peaceful takedown of the king. You can very much see the aftermath of the Spade King's imprisonment, of his takedown, how everyone is, and at the end of the nightmare that's been going on in the Dark World for some time, everyone is genuinely at peace. You can head towards the path of the fountain to the left, although not before ralsei says goodbye too. Repeating how muffled he was when he was cloaked, Suzie once again goads him into speaking up. He reveals himself. White, fluffy fur with shades of pink horns, glasses and a cute expression. Our healer of the party, speaker of the prophecy, is revealed as a cute little goat lad. Suzie seems surprised. Why is not exactly clear, but anyone who's played Undertale is having alarm bells ring in their head right now. I won't say too much, you can figure that out on your own if you've played Undertale. Kris and Suzie head for the fountain. The Holy plays as the fountain is within view, Suzie reflecting on the adventure they just had. It glows in the distance, the former bully and the human clouded in pure darkness as the fountain glows and glistens. Familiarly resembling that character creation screen at the very start, how far you've come from thinking this was just a simple Halloween spook, a prank, to a whole new world, a whole new game, a new adventure, a new story. Kris moves forward, their soul glowing as it interacts with the fountain. Sealing it, the track Your Power plays, signifying the end of your travels. Kris and Suzie wake up in an abandoned classroom, strewn around with objects matching the NPCs, the darkness within that world. A million questions are just running through our minds right now, and Kris and Susie's, rightfully so. Was any of that real? What the hell just happened? The pair of them get out of there. It's late in the day. The duo decide to tell Alphys that they couldn't find the chalk, although it's after school time now. Standing in front of the closet, Suzie asks Kris, them, to go back there tomorrow. Running off, you can explore around the abandoned school now or follow her. But heading towards the exit leads to Toriel calling you. How long has it been? She's been worried sick. She's gonna ground Kris. until Kris seemingly mentions that they've made a friend. Deciding that the little lad can stay out a bit longer, Kris is now free to explore. Explore hometown. I'm gonna be honest, this part of the game makes me cry. Or at least gets me emotional most playthroughs. During the game, you've had a few times to wind down from the crazy antics happening all around you, but with exiting the Dark World and having time to explore as you make your way out, it hits a part of me personally. After a fun day of being in a fantasy land, of being at school, enjoying yourself, you get to come home, but it's like you don't really want to leave. After all those antics and all that adventure, the fun banter between characters, the big old prophecy and a giant story that's just opened up to you, it just stops. Why the hell would you want it to come to such a crashing halt? You want more. So having to come home after what's been essentially a great day at school has this incredibly bittersweet feeling to it. It hits personally for me, actually, as I remember days from my own childhood exactly like this, where the walk home after a fun day at school doing whatever, but the walk back has a heaviness to it that you can't ascertain, but just feel. I feel like Toby really understands that feeling to an extent. More so on a general sense in that the track itself is playing at this part of the game, a town called Hometown, has a very heightened sense of saudade. It's composed of very soft sounding instrumentation, simple in a sense, but what it conveys is incredibly bittersweet emotionally. It's kind of like a lullaby, guiding you home. It fits that this is the part of the game that gives you the utmost freedom. You're able to explore virtually everywhere in Hometown before your travel home concludes. Home isn't far away either, so it's up to you to go wherever you wish. It's within that the really bittersweet, somber feel to a town called Hometown really is emphasised. You can visit certain places containing various characters from Undertale that are different in this universe. It's interesting pacing and utilisation of them, honestly, as in a way it's a reward to players after the unique antics of the Dark World, but also a way to establish some kind of familiarity to players, even those who haven't played Undertale. It's almost like those kind of long away, distant relatives you see now and then. There's a connection, but perhaps it's different from being super close. But it really plays up when you encounter characters such as Asgore. In Undertale, the man is the ruler of the world you traverse through, the underground, estranged from Toriel, who used to be his wife. In this universe, however, the man is living in squalor, disguised as a flower shop that looks to be doing well on the surface, but seems to be on the verge of closure. Then there's interacting with the keeper of QC's, a diner, who gives you a hot chocolate after talking to you briefly about how you and your brother, Asriel, used to come here. Kris's throat tightening if they drink the hot chocolate. Near QC's is Burger Pants, a disgruntled employee in Undertale, but a friend of Asriel's here who dearly misses the man. Father Alvin at the church recounts Kris's interest in just drinking juice from the place, although there's some implicit details about our human protagonist. Rudy, the father of the dear girl Noelle at the very start of the game, speaks on your mother, Toriel, and how she used to be. All over Hometown you can find these little sprinkles of world building and characterization for the human that we've been controlling all this time. Combined with the bittersweet tone of coming home from a fun day in a dark world and all these little details, it really frames Kris as someone who's got a life of their own. Someone whose reality really speaks to a sense of complication. People have lives of their own with complicated dynamics and interpersonal relationships, and Kris really is no exception. Their parents, Asgore and Toriel, seem to be really estranged, split even. Their big brother Asriel is at college, and the mere mention of such memories with the Goat Boy is enough to make Kris's throat tighten. That's something that we don't choose to happen. That happens by Kris's own volition. Speaking to Noelle out in the farthest left corner of the town reveals that the human was quite the prankster when they were younger, among other details. I find the entire framing of this entire section to be interesting, as while it serves to be quite the healthy reward for Undertale fans, it's also incredibly bittersweet and tragic in a way, as the nostalgic tone of this point of the game is laden in a sense of reality, contrasting the insanity of the Dark World and the idea of a world thawed from the arrival of the quiet human and the class bully. Suddenly the framing of our choices not mattering feels more like a person who feels their choices may not matter, because from what other people have said, from the way that Toriel and Asgore seem to have been split up, everything is out of their control, like someone growing up, having to process and sit through their life rapidly changing in the blink of an eye, as their parents have seemingly split, their brother leaves for a place they have no connection of, no knowledge of, so it might as well feel like abandonment, and having little connections outside of Noelle, being virtually friendless, unless you count Suzie today. I can kind of relate to that actually, in a way, heavily. All of this makes me wonder if this general section of the game in that regard was to not only diffuse leftover tension from the whole antics of the Dark World, and present the player and the plot with a chance to slow down. If entering the Dark World at the very beginning is imagination thawing so it can come to life, where individual meets fantasy, then you could reasonably argue that this is reality thawing as Kris and the player comes to grips with their fun journey being over. It hits me emotionally for that reason, because it's the end and it shouldn't have to be. We want to stay longer, but sometimes things are out of our control, and everything comes to an end, eventually, and you can end your adventures by returning home. Returning home greets you the track, "You can always come home." There's not much to do here in this particular part of the game, with Toriel giving you some brief interaction. If you choose to give Toriel the flowers that Asgore gave you, she'll secretly dispose of them in the kitchen bin, another reminder of the reality you're in. Aside from that though, you're free to wander around the small space for as much time as you wish. If you return to your room however and interact with your bed, it'll be the end of your adventures. If you choose to end your adventures, for now, the game ends. Except, not really. What's going on? Why is it nighttime all of a sudden? After a brief bit of silence, the scene cuts to night, Kris's room. Everything seems to be normal, except not really. Throwing themselves out of the bed, Kris hauntingly staggers to the center of the room and pulls their soul out. Clearly in some kind of pain from doing so. Holding it in their grasp, they hobble over to the bottom right, lobbing the thing into the nearby cage, leaving the player helpless as they can't influence anything going on. Staggering back to the center, their back faces the player as they pull out a knife, the red glint of their eye ominously staring directly at us. The last thing we see is a flash of red and the snare of a smile. And then, for first-time players, survey program reveals its true name, Deltarune. The title of the game disappears into the darkness as the game ends on a track called Don't Forget by Laura Shigihara. I'll let it play out. I think you should see what all of us saw at the time.
When the light is running low and the shadows start to grow and the places that you know seem like fantasy, there's a light inside your soul that's still shining in the cold, with the truth, the promise in our hearts. Don't forget, I'm with you in the dark.
This wasn't just a demo, this wasn't just a one-off singular adventure. Oh no, this wasn't even a drop in the ocean. This was Toby's next game, and on Halloween of 2018, he'd graced us with it. Man, explaining so much in all of those sections, just putting my thoughts across into this video so far, has felt like a trip, but it felt right in a way. With how much this game has had an impact on me, it's only fitting. To say that this game immediately made a splash, made a mark, is understated as all hell. This game exploded online, even while adhering to the 24-hour silence on spoilers that Toby requested. To quote the man directly, "Wow, those 24 hours really went by really quickly. Thank you to everyone that tried not to spoil the game for anyone else. I really appreciate it. To everyone that did talk about it, it's okay. I understand what it's like to have to wait before you can talk about something." Countless amounts of YouTube channels began to make videos on the game, many of which approached way past 500,000 views, some even staggering into the millions. This game was all over YouTube, and it helped to attract people who weren't already following Toby's stuff, who weren't already following Toby's request to mute spoilers. It's interesting that in that time there were two big sects of Deltarune followers / fans back then, in that you had those who were coming from Undertale or were interested on what Toby was doing, who followed his requests for 24 hours of spoilers discussion, and those who weren't aware and thus made videos, hopping on the hype train. I actually remember beating the game a day or so after it came out, and Deltarune absolutely dominated YouTube's homepage at the time. Elsewhere, fan communities sprouted, as they would. On Reddit, a community for Deltarune was set up. Archives showed it was a very bare-bones place at first, but it quickly grew to amass a large amount of lurkers alongside subscribers. Fun fact for you, by the way, I used to be one of the mods of that place around 2019 or so, and from what I remember, approximately more than 1 million people had visited the subreddit in November alone within the first few days. Proof that the place was absolutely teeming with a fanbase. Sadly, there's few archives of when the place was first established, but the place had been around for at least 14 hours by the time November came around. A Discord server would also be established, serving as a giant hub for the Reddit side of things. It continues to be super active to this day. Fan art, memes, and more would immediately follow the release of the game and the birth of the fanbase online, with some of the earliest fan works cropping up during this time. It's really nostalgic to think about, actually, in that I remember being here for all of it, and yet since that time, so much has changed. More to think about. On other parts of the internet, such as 4chan, the game would certainly pick up a presence on areas of the site such as Trash and VG, where threads for characters and pairings would pick up steam, alongside the long-running UTG, Undertale General, threads on the former, including Deltarune within its confines now, which even today continues to have a massive presence. It's funny, in a way. In a way, it's like the following of the game outside of YouTube took Toby's words in a very literal way, keeping fandom activity between art sites, anonymity via 4chan, and the more surface level dwellings of the Reddit and the Discords. Several Discord servers and subreddits dedicated to Deltarune shipping would soon crop up as well, a lot of which I had a hand in helping grow and still continue to. Why? A man gets bored. Honestly, it grew from a fondness of the characters from playthroughs I'd do later. It's also surreal to look back on this whole era. We were still reeling from the spoiler embargo, and a lot of people didn't really know what Deltarune was. What is it, a sequel? Prequel? AU? What the hell was it supposed to be? Nobody really knew! And for a while it kinda stayed like that, until people got a lot more comfortable and settled, I guess. It's fascinating to me just how decentralized this fandom truly is. Even back in those days, everything was so splintered. Nowadays it still is, with most places not having much connection to the other, which I find to be quite fascinating in all honesty. This era of Deltarune was so different from how it is now. There was a certain level of chaos when it came to the fandom, and Toby really didn't help in that regard. Not to say his words were bad though. Around November 2nd, a day or two after the release of Deltarune Chapter 1, or Survey Program, Toby released his extensive thoughts on the game. This was our chance to learn a little more about what we had in store, how long the game would take, how things would pan out. More was coming, more was definitely on the horizon. although it would certainly take a fair amount of time. He clarified what the game was, as well as giving more elaborate points on what was going to happen from here. I think the main thing that stuck on everyone's mind were the closing words, "Don't forget." I think those two words subconsciously melded themselves to the fandom for a long time. Nobody was going to forget. For years and years, nobody forgot. People kept talking, theorizing, making art. The fandom evolved, developed, expanded. Everywhere you could reasonably go, people never forgot, and why would they? A game where the protagonist escapes into a fantasy world is something nobody could easily forget. It's an incredibly memorable game for what it is. People wanted to return to that fantasy, and so they waited. It's really weird to talk about this all. Yeah, I know I've said that already, like probably, 5 fucking times at this point. I know at this point it's probably getting really irritating to hear, actually. Perhaps irritating anyway, but the thing is, I've never had to explain something I've only thought about to this extent before. Sharing a part of my soul is kind of terrifying in that regard. Really? Why does this game matter to me this much? This freaking much, that I'm making a video on my thoughts and feelings from back then? That I'm attempting to document the general feel of a fandom way long ago? All these little bubbles of different thoughts that fly around and buzz around my soul like a pack of hornets, like, why? Because I'm sentimental. I'm a sentimental person that values these sort of things, damn it. It shows within my entire YouTube channel. I document things that, yeah, to someone else doesn't fucking matter. To someone else, all of this is completely insignificant. All of this is jibber jabber, obscure things that don't matter to anyone else. But they matter to me. They matter to me because I think that to someone out there on this blue ball spinning in space, it means something. What's wrong with documenting the weird, the obscure, the forgotten, and the unseen? I like that, and Deltarune kinda matters to me in a similar way. In all honesty, I do wonder if my interest in the game, is of perfect timing. Getting real personal for a second, I remember that very Halloween when Deltarune came out, I was having one of the shittiest Halloweens imaginable, where everything just went wrong. Nothing felt particularly happy. I was dreading the rest of the day, actually, the rest of the night. Having to open my door to do the whole trick-or-treat shtick when I was in such a down state. But in my interest, I made the decision to blot out how bad of a day it had been and let myself get immersed within Deltarune. It wasn't an immediate first love, rather, I actually closed the game at first because Susie kinda disgusted me. That penchant for violence actually really pissed me off. I rage quit the game, but I played it. I experienced it, I laughed, I smiled, I had so much fun in the process, and in February of 2019, a few months later, I returned to it once more for a second, more detailed playthrough. During that era, I remember being a college student. Was in a rough place. I was growing up, still trying to understand myself. I was tired and worn from constantly stressful life situations and equally stressful college work. Needing an escape, I fell into Deltarune for a second time. And, well, I found myself inside that closet again, inside that dark world, seeing Lancer and all these strange and wonderful characters for a second time. It was a reprieve, escaping the real world, escaping my troubles, escaping the stress of trying to understand myself, my life, what I wanted to do in the future, of all these troubling situations I found hard to process, of situations people put me in all the time without asking me and causing me further stress. From light to dark, I hopped back in, and I fell in love with the game. Nowadays, I understand that depending on a game to this extent is a tad dangerous. Cringy even, I can admit that. Losing myself in a game and shutting out what I perhaps needed to experience or hear is not exactly a good thing, so I toned it down. But the game would continue to stick around in my life. As I ran out of funds at the end of my second college year, I turned to doing art commissions, improving myself in the process. Halloween came around again, and with a bag of crisps and a can of cola, I played Deltarune for a third time, 1 year after it had came out. I returned back to the dark world once again. Ever since, I've made it a bit of a yearly tradition to return to the game. Returning on that fateful night with some snacks in the comfort of my room on an increasingly colder Halloween night, I was too old to go out and do trick-or-treating, so for the first time in a very long time, I had something to do each Halloween. I had time to spend, having fun, doing my own thing, cherishing a game that honestly brought me a chance to just switch myself off, away from the stresses of life, do what I want. I opened the doors to a dark world and I willingly hopped on in each time. Like Alice, I fell into Wonderland. And every time I'd leave that dark world, I'd get emotional. I can own up to that, as silly and cringy and a bit pathetic as it sounds. I didn't want this experience to end. I didn't want to go back to reality, really. I wanted to continue the adventure. But everything comes to pass, everything has its time, and everything ends. And I'd get reminded of why I loved this game each time. That flame of passion would spark up again, keeping my interest burning even as the years ticked on by and we got into the drought years of content. The years where updates to the game felt so few and far between, very little. Where content was beginning to dry up, where the effects of a long game's development were beginning to rear their head for an entire fandom. There's a reason I haven't really spoken on chapter 2 much. Why is that? Well, that chapter matters to me a lot, but I know I wouldn't be able to give it justice by just Frankensteining it onto this video. Perhaps I'll make a video on it someday, but I'm focusing on chapter 1 and the demo for now. But chapter 2 does matter to me a lot. I wasn't there to see all of it, but a few friends of mine and I decided to hop in at the very end and watch Fangamer's livestream around 2 years ago now, Undertale's 6th anniversary, in which they played Deltarune chapter 1. Seeing continue to chapter 2 broke me. Honestly, it was 4 in the morning over here in the UK and I was hollering at the top of my lungs with friends from the United States as the option got selected, my 2 American buddies absolutely ecstatic while I sobbed tears of joy as chapter 2 of the game gets shown. And then an announcement of the 2nd chapter coming out in a day or so's time. I freaking lost it. Honestly, it's kind of embarrassing to admit that I straight up screamed and sobbed at 4 fucking AM over a video game, but listen, you've watched this far, so deal with my cringe. But honestly though, I've never seen a fandom more on fire in that moment. Every Discord server I was in, thread, Twitter post, Reddit post, 4chan post, video I saw was alive in an instant with excitement and speculation. I've never seen something so magical like that before. Just seeing an entire fandom, like, lit up in passion. And I wonder how we're all gonna be once the next chapters come out. Perhaps I will talk about chapter 2 someday in a video like this, if I feel like it. I do have a lot to say on that chapter 2. In all of the time I've been here, the memories of this game have meant more to me than just being nostalgic. I've made so many comfy memories, friends, connections, fun moments over this game, even in its demo form. So many wonderful, creative people that I have no idea if I'd ever meet if I hadn't decided to get into Deltarune. I've met so many artists, writers, people I can dearly say I love with all my heart because they're just amazing to me. It's been such a wild ride, just sitting back and witnessing it all. From that first demo to the entire world changing as we had to stay inside due to a global pandemic, to now being here post chapter 2 in 2024 as of this video, just waiting for that eventual point where we get new chapters. It's been one hell of a wild ride and it's gonna continue to be like this for a damn while. A lot has changed in 6 years. So many people have come and gone, good and bad things have happened. It makes me feel old, thinking on it all, being this nostalgic, I suppose. In all of the time that this demo, chapter 1, so much has changed. The internet has changed, people have, the world has. In thinking on that, I think to those we've lost along the way, those who never did get to see chapter 2, like Etika, who played Deltarune just a few days after its reveal. I think on all the people who fell off the train of interest, be it if they wanted to or not. I think on all the people who were super social, put indoors thanks to a pandemic that would hit us at the start of, as of this video, the newest decade. I think on how everything just seems to have flipped its script, how people have changed, how the earth itself continues to spin around the darkness of space. Where am I going with this? I'll be honest with you, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm emphasizing that Deltarune's pull can also very much be that it's a source of comfort in that sense. In a world, a timeline where so much is constantly changing and negativity does fill the world, where things genuinely at points feel like they're getting bleaker and less happy in different departments, where we're on the cusp of really beginning to cherish media of the past, where the world can be an incredibly dark and chaotic place for so many who get caught in the madness of it all. Deltarune fits a certain niche in my opinion, where people can come back to it in these trying times because it's comforting fantasy. Kris and Suzie fell into a fantasy land, a dark world, escaping reality for just a moment, but being changed from what they experience. Is it no wonder that people keep so invested in this game when the same kind of happened to them? This isn't to say that all the world is doom and gloom though. Indeed, while I find myself reminiscing and thinking on what's been lost in the chaos of all of this, the turn of the decade, I think of the many personal developments I've gone through. The many personal developments, good changes, moments in the lives of so many people, Deltarune fans, people who aren't, just everyone has gone through. For as much as things have been utter hell in many regards these past few years, it's had its positives too. Deltarune, to me, also particularly feels like a shred of normality before things did get more complicated, and I wonder if that's why people focus on the characters so much. These whimsical, kind of anime-esque characters that convey certain archetypes or traits, characters that have more to them than meets the eye, that have whole plot lines that have yet to be conveyed in the little shreds of backstory within them all, have this pull, this orbit that ensnares the attention of people. You wanna know what it reminds me of? The melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya. It sounds like a really weird comparison to make, but you'd be surprised with the amount of similarities between it and Deltarune. Both having characters where their true sides aren't exactly understood as of yet, both having strange events and alternate worlds, both having a boisterous female character that influences the plot greatly to some extent, a mage-esque character who's the healer of the group in certain degrees, etc. And like Deltarune, people still fixate themselves onto Haruhi and the group that comprises the SOS Brigade. P.S. Go watch the melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya, it's fucking great. A bit dated, but still really comfy if you want something with a fair amount of mystery. Another similarity it shares with Deltarune, now that I think about it. Okay, I know, back to the point. I guess what I'm trying to ultimately express is that there's a lot of reasons why this game is so utterly magnetic. To the point that even in the fast-moving reality we inhabit, known as the internet, it refuses to fade from people's minds. Toby's influence has something to do with that too, I feel, but Deltarune just has a feel to it that keeps people interested. Even at this current point in the year 2024, people haven't forgotten. Even those who aren't super invested into Deltarune, like me and a lot of other people, still recall the game. Still draw it, still write, still do a megaton of stuff revolving around it. The internet is this constantly moving machine made of different parts, where history is as fickle as it is fast, where if you blink you'll miss it. And Deltarune is an exception to that rule, to that kind of machine, where it survives through the sheer magnetic pull it has on people's hearts, in a way. Deltarune is very much a bastion of imagination. In a world that's confusing and bleak sometimes, the game is a whimsical adventure starring a cast of characters that go through an incredibly imaginative, spontaneous adventure in a world that feels like that of Alice in Wonderland, a D&D game, an expansion of what Undertale brought to the table and something unique in its own identity. Everything about Deltarune just screams imagination, the kind of imagination you'd use as a kid to imagine a world of your own toys, or adventures of their own, or thinking outside of the boundaries of a game to see something you wouldn't usually. That spontaneity, that endless boundary hopping, that way of thinking so outwardly is what makes Deltarune so poignant in the idea that it's very much a representative of that kind of imagination that people can just so easily forget. It's a beautiful experience that utilizes that imagination to its fullest in a variety of different ways, and like everyone else, I'm genuinely excited for the future of this game. Now, allow me to step out of my talks of fantasy into the reality we're in currently. Dark worlds can't exist without light worlds after all, and for all the escapism you can get from Deltarune, you shouldn't forget the real world too. We're in a really strange time currently. We're in an era where the creativity of artists is being challenged in a few ways, where it's harder to just dip into our imaginations and have a bit of fun escapism. The rise of AI has made putting one's work on the internet far more frustrating, with bad actors using AI to profit off of the work of others without any kind of compensations of the people it's stealing from, or the lives it's ruining. But it's not just this either. Let's not just consider art as a piece, a drawing. Let's consider it in the general sense too. We're in a crucial moment in 21st century history where we're finally getting around to archiving a ton of media that's been formerly lost via the intentional actions of companies and IP holders, or unintentionally done or mishandled. It's led to people archiving media of varying degrees of popularity, but all equally important in a historical sense, with places like the Lost Media Wiki and its splinter communities doing what they can to archive the past that companies usually don't atone for, with their flippant disregard for media that matters to history and other such entities. On the video game side of things, you have a few accounts on social media sites, like that of the account I run for Sapari archivism to the public, and various accounts documenting specific trivias for games, like that of Super Mario Bros, doing their part in cherishing the artistic integrity of what makes these games so amazing, these works of art as amazing, cherishing what makes these games amazing and why it all matters, doing what companies such as Nintendo and Sony refuse to do, doing the thing that they really should be doing because it's their media, and I think people have earned the right to knowing what makes their favourite cherished pieces of media tick, or how they came to be. In the past few years, there's been a notion to push towards archivism in general of art. Archivism for the sake of everyone being able to experience these things. This especially shows in cases such as Glover, a game made by talented people, talented programmers, artists, game designers, a whole Pirates crew of creatives, with their property now in the hands of an IP shark that would strike down well-meaning archivists for doing what they cannot, while touting themselves as quote-unquote legitimate archivism, despite a long history of failing to do decent archivism, mocking the people who do the actual archivism at hand, and have the closest match to respecting the work of the original developers. Oh yeah, and they also use AI. We've moved into an era where the care for these games and all these different types of media have really gone to a point where people are rightfully documenting these things that they may or may not have a personal connection to. Especially in the case of Nintendo, for example, for a lot of what's being archived is based off of the memories and the adoration for the very products and games so on that a lot of archival folks either grew up with or have a strong love for, recompensing their adoration into wanting to preserve these experiences in a variety of different ways. We don't want these games to fall to the wayside, lost forever in a crevice because of the negligence of other people. You may be asking, where did this random tangent come from? How does this connect to Deltarune? There's a point I'm making here, don't worry. The point is that art matters, damn it. Toby and his team making Deltarune are fortunately not like the examples I've given prior, thank goodness. But this doesn't dissuade the point. We're in an era where the value of what means a lot to us, games like this, is mattering more and more and more, and that the memories and feelings around it and everything that made them what they are, everything that makes these games so valuable, is fluid. In the blink of an eye, a lot of what happened with Deltarune's initial release on that Halloween has been forgotten. And it's not unreasonable to understand why. It's a distant memory now to a lot of people. Chapter 2's release took a lot of the storm in a similar way, and eventually that's going to become a distant memory too. It's a scary fact to admit, but eventually there's going to be a day where the game is in its full, complete state, and how all of it started and the feelings and thoughts that cropped up around it, historical moments for the game and a lot of the people and a lot of the fandom, is going to fade away. Even the original survey program website screen is now gone. The demo is not officially up anymore, as the site is now in a neater, more presentable fashion. And want to know something scarier that I don't see a lot of people discussing? There's eventually going to be an end to Deltarune, an end to this game, an end to a still flowing hype train that's keeping this game going as much as the adoration and love that drives the fanbase forward is doing. It'll all come to an end someday. People will love the game but eventually move on. I think that in all sense and purposes, it's right that we cherish the imagination that makes this game what it is. The imagination that pulled so many people in to begin with. We should cherish our memories with it, document this game's history, its fandom, so on. Everything everyone ever felt, witnessed, appreciated, disliked, so on. Because it's history, and it deserves to be seen. so that in a decade's time, long after Deltarune's time in the sun, people can get to understand what we saw, what we felt, what it inspired us to do. This should happen for everything like this, because at the end of the day, nothing lasts forever, but you can keep those memories alive forever. You get to let generations far younger than you, beyond you, understand just how much this meant to people like me, to millions, to so many past, present, and future. This video was a long time coming. Truth be told, a lot of this might be a ton of waffle. Perhaps you might think I'm a bit cringe for being so open about how this game makes me feel. Kinda don't care at this point though. I'm gonna hold myself to my own words. I've made this video to document the way this game genuinely uses imagination to pull people in, why it matters to so many people, and I hope that in addition to documenting this for myself, I hope that I can really convey just how much Deltarune meant back then too. Enjoy the things that mean a lot to you. Love those things. Cherish them. There's an expiration date on everything, but this doesn't mean it's the end. Everything has its time and everything ends, but you have the power to make those thoughts, those feelings, last forever. Let future generations know why it mattered. Don't let art fall to the wayside. You have all the power of a digital age we're currently in to show that and do that with. Don't forget.
I stare at the stars and the sky up above and think, what am I made of? Am I full of sorrow? Am I hurt and pain? Or am I filled with love? I walk by myself on the streets below and ask every child I know, do you think tomorrow will bring sun or rain? Which one of these will show? I can't say goodbye to yesterday, my friend. I keep holding on till the end. Out of the darkness, there is no other way than the light leading to yesterday. It's there that I'll find inner peace, not war, and dreams that I let slip away. I'll find the joyfulness I'm looking for way back in yesterday. of laughter, a warm hug, a smile, a kiss from you to me. I fall to my knees, I cry and I cry. Love, do not pass me by. Happy ever after, please stay for a while. Make time refuse to fly. I can't say goodbye to yesterday, my friend, 'cause I know how good it has been. Facing forever, here I stand, come what may. Bring the old, bring the new, yesterday. It's there that I'll find inner peace, not war, and dreams that I let slip away. I'll find the joyfulness I'm looking for way back in yesterday.